Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Brighton, England, a constituent part of the city of Brighton and Hove, a former town situated on the southern coast of England in the county of East Sussex. This episode contains the hometown murder cases of the Babes in the Wood murders, where two 9-year-old girls, Nicola and Karen Hadaway, on the 9th of October 1986 by a 20-year-old local roofer, Russell Bishop, in Ward Park, Moulsecoomb, Brighton. The second case is Nicholas van Hessen, better known as Nicholas van Hoogstraten, born on the 25th of February 1945, a British businessman and convicted criminal involvement in property. And the last case is the Brighton trunk murders, where two murders linked to Brighton in 1934, each with the body of a murdered woman placed in a trunk. The first case we're looking at today is the Babes in the Wood murders. Before we go into detail with that, just need to tell you about the break that season 1 of Hometown Murders has taken. We will initially finish season 1 on Monday the 28th of September, so a few more episodes until then, and then we will come back for the second season with bigger and better hometowns. This will be released on the 2nd of November. Please reach out to us if you do want to feature any hometowns. Remember, we have 3 massive cases each week from that hometown, so the more suggestions the better. And while we're working on that season break, got some exciting news. So Need Media, who produces the Hometown Murders podcast and the Brief History podcast, so the creators, myself, Andrew Knight and Harry Edmondson, we're working on a 3rd podcast. This is going to be the Mind Blown History podcast. It's going to be short 5-minute episodes twice weekly. We'll release episodes on weird and wonderful history that's not featured in textbooks or in the classroom. You'll hear stuff that sounds weird, that sounds non-believable or downright made up, so listen out for that. That will be released on the 2nd of November as well, so make sure you subscribe to that and reach out to us on social media. If you search Hometown Murders, we're on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Like, follow, share, subscribe to those social medias as well for further news and trailers and more information. Thank you. So the Babes in the Murder case from Brighton. So Nicola and Karen were best friends who lived close to each other in a Moulsecoomb estate in the north of Brighton, but attended different schools. At around 3:30 p.m. on the 9th of October 1986, the two returned home from school before going out to play. At around 5 p.m, Susan Fellows saw her daughter and Karen playing with a roller boot, the last time she saw her daughter alive. When seen by a 14-year-old acquaintance near a parade of shops in the Lewis Road area, the girls were told to go home as their parents would become worried. Nicola reportedly told Karen, quote, "Come on, let's go over to the park," end quote, referring to Ward Park where they were not allowed. At around 6:30 p.m, the girls were seen near a police box on Lewis Road, where Bishop was also seen near and wearing what appeared to be a light blue top. That same day, Bishop had gone to Nicola's house to speak to a lodger who lived there. Nicola told Bishop to go away and called his teenage girlfriend a slag. When the girls failed to return home by their bedtime, their parents panicked. Karen's mother, Michelle, made a 999 call. A search party of around 200 police and neighbours were organised. A helicopter was brought in to help search Ward Park. Bishop joined the search, claiming his terrier Misty was a highly trained tracker dog and insured for £17,000. The bodies of the girls were found in Wild Park by searchers Kevin Rowland and his friend Michael Marchant on the afternoon of the 10th of October 1986. The girls' bodies were found hidden in a makeshift den in a park. An autopsy revealed that they had both been strangled and sexually assaulted. Bishop fell into suspicion due to his close involvement in the search. When the bodies of the girls were found, Bishop was close by and ran towards the scene with a police officer. However, the constable recorded that Bishop did not get close enough to even see them properly. Bishop's story was littered with inconsistencies. He told detectives that on the evening in question he'd gone to Moulsecoomb because he intended to steal a car from nearby University of Sussex campus. He also claimed he'd gone to a newsagent to buy a paper but realised he had no money. Bishops told detectives he planned to see his teenage girlfriend that evening but failed to turn up because he had bought some cannabis and went home instead. He also tailored his story to fit the evidence, claiming he felt the girl's neck for a pulse after finding them dead to explain any potential exchange of trace evidence. Due to the series of inconsistencies, Bishop was arrested on suspicion of murder on the 31st of October. Bishop, born the 9th of February 1966, was a petty thief and jobbing roofer. He was well known around the Moulsecoomb estate in Brighton. In 1986, he lived in Hollingdean area of the city, around 1.5 miles from his two young victims. Despite living with his pregnant partner and young son, he had a reputation as a ladies' man, with a string of girlfriends, some of whom were still in school. At the time of the murders, he was having an affair with a 16-year-old Marion Stevenson, who lived round the corner from Karen and Nicola. He played football and cricket with Barry Fellows, Nicola's father. Bishop's friend Dougie Judd lodged with the Fellows family at the time of the murders. Judd knew both pairs of parents and warned Nicola and Karen to stay away from Bishop because of his clear sexual interest in young girls. His teammates record how he had a habit of wolf whistling at schoolgirls when they walked past and stared intently at young girls in skirts doing handstands. There were some suggestions that Bishop encouraged local teens to appear in homemade pornographic films that were passed around to men on the estate. Former friend Jeff Caswell, who also used to go fishing with Bishop, described him as a habitual liar. Caswell said, quote, "He was a typical lad around town that time. He'd grown a moustache and had a car he'd race everywhere, and he was always telling lies, trying to big himself up. He was only around 5'5" tall and weighed around 8 stone, and he would think he suffered from a little man syndrome." End quote. He was always telling porkies about this and that. He was also a thief. He brought into cars and steal stuff. He'd been a roofer but was going nowhere really. He also said Bishop was wrongly arrested on suspicion of involvement in the Brighton bombing. Nicola's father, Barry Fellows, was arrested in 2009 at his home in Aylesmere Port, Cheshire on suspicion of rape and conspiracy to rape his daughter. Douglas Judd was also arrested for suspicion of sexual offences. A spokesperson for the Sussex investigation into sexual abuse allegations was unrelated to the ongoing murder inquiry. No charges were brought against both men and they were subsequently released. Bishop was initially tried for the rape and murder of 2 girls in 1987 at Lewes Crown Court. He was acquitted by the jury after 2 years of deliberations, attributed to a series of blunders in the prosecution's case. The pathologist and forensic investigation team failed to record and therefore could not accurately state the time of death. At the trial, the prosecution suggested the girls were killed between 6:15 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. Without scientific evidence to back this time of murders, the prosecution could not challenge Bishop's alibi on the night of the murders. Though the girls were strangled to death, Neither measurements for hand marks around the necks or fingerprints left by the strangler were taken. Forensic scientists did not analyse blood discovered on Karen's underwear. A key piece of prosecution's case rested on the recovery of a blue Pinto brand sweatshirt. The top was found at the railway line on Moulsecoomb station. Police believe Bishop discarded the top after attacking and killing the girls and were confident the clothing held a cachet of forensic clues. The police did not properly preserve the evidence, allowing Bishop's defence team to cast doubt on the reliability of the material. Under questioning, Bishop denied that the sweatshirt belonged to him, but his girlfriend Jenny Johnson alleged the clothing was Bishop's. Prosecution hoped this would undermine Bishop's credibility and portray him as a liar who was trying to distance himself from crucial piece of evidence. However, at the trial, Johnson changed her story, telling the jury she'd never seen the top before. The judge, Justice Schmeeman, directed the jury that unless they were sure, first, that the girls were dead by 6:30 p.m, they should acquit. The prosecution believed the girls were killed between 5:15 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. However, witnesses stated they saw the girls alive at 6:30 p.m. and Bishop leaving Wild Park at 6:30 p.m. Bishop was convicted in December 1990 of a similar attack on another Brighton girl. He was found guilty of the kidnapping and attempted murder of a 7-year-old girl in Whitehawk 10 months earlier and was sentenced to at least 14 years before eligible for release. He was turned down twice by parole board. The 2005 repeal of the double jeopardy provision of the Criminal Justice Act of 2003 meant Bishop could face fresh trial with substantial new evidence. Eurofin's forensic services were engaged, the same forensic team that helped bring the killers of Stephen Lawrence to justice. Senior scientific advisor Roy Green of Eurofins were asked in August 2012 to examine the evidence and recovered a 1,000,000-to-1 DNA match, linking Bishop to the discarded sweatshirt. A taping from Karen's left forearm was also found to contain Bishop's DNA. On May the 10th, 2016, a suspect was arrested for the murders. In December 2017, the Court of Appeal ordered quashing the 1987 acquittals and called for a second jury trial for Bishop. On the 2nd of February 2018, the prosecution announced that Bishop would face a fresh trial for the murders at the Old Bailey. He was removed from his cell at Franklin Prison in County Durham and taken to the local police station, where he was arrested for the murders. The trial was scheduled for the 15th of October 2018. Prosecutor Alan Altman QC told the jury the case against Bishop was not just based on attempt to kill another child in a similar manner, but on other compelling evidence. He explained significant part of the inquiry had also been to re-evaluate various areas of scientific work that were performed for the purposes of the 1987 trial, but through the lens of modern-day techniques. DNA profiling, which was available in 86 and 87, was then in its infancy. Bishop suggested that Nicola's father Barry was to blame, telling the jury the police spent, quote, 32 years building the case against the wrong man, end quote. Bishop was not in court every day for his 9-week trial and complained to the judge about feeling suicidal over the temporary stay at Belmarsh, requesting his return to Franklin Prison. At 2018 trial, the prosecution put forward a different timeline. Altman presented evidence the girls were still alive at 6:30 p.m. and that Bishop returned to Wild Park. Defence witnesses at the 87 trial returned as prosecution witnesses in 2018. At this trial, Altman argued that forensic samples taken at tapings in 86 were so carefully handled by the police and preserved by scientists that he can present them as a time capsule to prove Bishop's guilt. On the 10th of December 2018, after a 9-week trial at the Central Criminal Court, a jury of 7 men and 5 women returned a guilty verdict after 2.5 hours of deliberation. In March 2020, it was announced that Jennifer Johnson, Bishop's girlfriend at the time of the murders, was to be charged with preventing the course of justice in relation to the police statements and court evidence which had been given during the original investigation in the 1987 trial. The second case is Nicholas van Hoogstraten. He was born in Shoreham by Sea, West Sussex, to Charles, a shipping agent, and Edna, a housewife. He was educated at Jesuit school in nearby Worthing. His grandfather was a major shareholder in the British-based East India Company, although the value of his interest had expired by the time Hoogstraten was born. He left school at the age of 16 and joined the Merchant Navy for a year. He began a property business in the Bahamas with an initial investment of £1,000 realised from the sale of his stamp collection. On his return to the UK, he moved to Notting Hill Gate and bought houses very cheaply because of rent controls, but specialised in persuading tenants to move out using threatening practices associated with Peter Rackman. He built up capital through a loan sharking business based in towns along the south coast of England, where he would take property deeds as collateral. Many loanees were unable to maintain his unreasonable payment terms and defaulted on their loans, losing their properties to him and enabling him to build up a substantial property portfolio along the south coast and in London. By the age of 22, he owned 350 properties in Sussex and was reportedly Britain's youngest millionaire, although the Times in 1967 and 1972 referred to his status as being self-styled. By 1980, aged 35, he owned over 2,000 properties. He later sold the majority of his housing to invest outside Britain, chiefly in mining and farming interests in Nigeria and later Zimbabwe. Aged just 22, he was convicted for paying a gang to throw a grenade into the house of Rabbi Bernard Braunstein, a Brighton cantor, on the 12th of November 1967. Braunstein's son David owed a debt to Hoogstraten over a failed textile business they joint owned. Hoogstraten had become dissatisfied with a repayment arrangement the two had made. According to evidence given in court by Sylvia Braunstein, the wife of Braunstein Sr., Hoogstraten had announced during a threatening altercation at the Braunsteins' home, where he'd regularly dined, quote, "I'm a fascist, a Nazi, didn't you know that? If I wanted, I could pay £50 to men in London to get every Jew in Brighton bumped off," end quote. He was sentenced to a 4-year prison sentence in May 1968 and sentenced to a further 4-year sentence the following August to run concurrently after an appeal. At a further appeal in 1970, the Lord Justice Wynne described Hoogstraten as, quote, "a sort of self-imagined devil who likes to think himself as an emissary of Beelzebub," end quote. Thinking Hoogstraten had built up a picture of himself as a sinister international figure, he believed Hoogstraten was little more than a child, a Walter Mitty character who grew out all of this nonsense. Van Hoogstraten said of the grenade attack in 2000, quote, "It seems a bit distasteful to me now, but back then when I was young, these weren't anarchists, they were businessmen, respectable people," end quote. He was arrested immediately after his release and was subsequently jailed on 8 counts of handling stolen goods. In October 1972, he was sentenced to a further 15 months for bribing prison officers to smuggle him luxuries. Quote, "I ran Wormwood Scrubs when I was in there," end quote, he told Jane Kelly of the Sunday Times in January 2006. On the site of the former High Cross House, a former nursing home destroyed by the fire of an unknown cause, Van Hoogstraten began constructing a private mansion he called Hamilton Palace near Uckfield in East Sussex in the mid-1980s. Hamilton Palace, located near Brighton was reportedly named after the capital of Bermuda, where Van Hoogstraten owned property. Construction of the mansion began in 1985 and cost around $40 million by 2006. The neoclassical palace features a copper dome and is larger than Buckingham Palace. The enormous edifice is intended to house his private collection of art, currently stored in Switzerland, and includes a marble mademoiselle he intends for himself. In English law, perpetual trusts are only allowed in the upkeep of monuments and graves. By housing the palace as a manualism, Van Hoogstraten's trust would legally own the building and their fittings in perpetuity after his death. A large portion of his wealth has been transferred into a Bermudian trust for the upkeep of historic monuments. He was involved in a long-running feud with the Ramblers Association and a legal battle with the local authority over a right-of-way across the land around the mansion. In 1990, he had the public paths blocked with razor wire and a pile of discarded refrigerators. The structure of the mansion and ancillary buildings is largely in place, but with little work done on the project since Van Hoogstraten fell out with architect Anthony Brown in 2000, the site stands uncompleted. When neighbours called for the property to be put to good use by helping the needy, Van Hoogstraten said, quote, "The homeless, the majority of whom are so by their own volition and sheer laziness, are one of the filthiest burdens on the public purse today. The chance of my offering an opportunity for them to occupy Hamilton Palace is just ludicrous." End quote. He also denied the project was stalled, saying, quote, "Even the most moronic of peasants would be able to see from the pictures that we've been busy landscaping in the grounds of the palace." End quote. Sometime in the 1980s, Van Hoogstraten began a business relationship with Mohammed Sabir Raja, an immigrant from Pakistan who worked in Brighton as a real estate dealer and landlord. Like Hoogstraten, Raja was an unscrupulous businessman dubbed Brighton's worst landlord by local newspaper The Evening Argus. Hoogstraten lent money to Raja at a lower rate than the banks, and the loans were not recorded on paper so as to avoid paying taxes. Raja used the money to buy properties. Their relationship went well until the housing price bubble burst in 1989. Raja failed to foresee the drop in prices and kept buying, which eventually put him in financial trouble. In desperation, Raja raised a building society mortgage on a property for which he already owed money to Hoogstraten. Hoogstraten discovered this and demanded additional security for his loans to Raja. Raja gave Hoogstraten the deeds to some of his properties. Raja also signed some blank property transfer forms and gave them to Hoogstraten. Hoogstraten could then fill in the names of any of Raja's properties on these forms and thereby transfer ownership to himself, which he promised to do if Raja defaulted on his loans. This was not the first time he had done so. Raja did default, and Hoogstraten fell in turn seized some of Raja's properties using these forms. Hoogstraten and Raja began arguing over how much money was still owned. In October 1993, Raja went to the High Court alleging breach of trust, demanding the return of the property deeds he had lodged with Hoogstraten, and alleged that he had fraudulently seized his properties using the blank transfer forms. In April 1998, Raja sued Hoogstraten for conspiracy and fraud. On the morning of the 2nd of July 1990, two of Hoogstraten's hired thugs, disguised as handymen, arrived at Raja's residence. When Raja answered the door to them, a fight quickly broke out. Raja was stabbed 5 times in the heart and neck and was shot in the head twice at point-blank range, dying as a subsequence. In July 2002, Van Hoogstraten was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for the manslaughter of Raja after being found not guilty of murder. A jury at the Old Bailey decided, although he was clearly wanted Mr. Raja harmed, there was no evidence that he had intended for Mr. Raja to be murdered. This conviction was subsequently quashed by the Court of Appeal. The preliminary hearing for the retrial was held at the Old Bailey at the 17th of November 2013 before the High Court Judge Sir Stephen Mitchell. In his summary to the judge, Newman neglected to mention that one of the thugs who killed Raja possessed a sawn-off shotgun. Because of this omission, Judge Mitchell decided that Hoogstragen could not have anticipated that Mr. Raja might have been killed, and he was acquitted Hoogstragen of manslaughter. And the last case we're looking at is the Brighton trunk murders. 2 murders linked to Brighton in 1934, both with mod bodies of murdered women placed in a trunk. The first murder was discovered on the 17th of June 1934 when an unclaimed plywood trunk was noticed by William Joseph Finicum at the left luggage office at Brighton railway station as he investigated a smell. He alerted the police and Chief Inspector Robert Donaldson, who opened the trunk to find the dismembered torso of a woman. When other stations were alerted, a suitcase at King's Cross railway station was found to contain the legs. The head and arms were never found. The press named the victim the girl with the pretty feet, or simply pretty feet, because the corpse had dancer's feet, thought beautiful. The post-mortem, conducted by Sir Bernard Spilsbury, revealed that the woman was about 25 and 5 months pregnant. Neither the victim nor her murderer was ever identified. Chief Inspector Donaldson is suspected a local abortionist named Messiah based on what was known about him and on Salisbury's notes. Internal examination of the torso had not revealed the cause of death. The legs and feet found at King's Cross belonged to the torso. The victim had been well nourished. She had been not younger than 21 and not older than 28, has stood around 5 feet 2 inches and weighed roughly 8.5 stone. She was also 5 months pregnant at the time of death. Donaldson asked officers to watch Messiah covertly. One drafted from Hove confronted Messiah, expecting him to come quickly. Instead, the doctor wrote a list of names and it seemed to the policeman that the sun had gone in. All of a sudden, the consulting room was a place of sombre shadows. The policeman did not tell Donaldson, who heard only when he was warned by a senior officer to back off. Messiah moved to London, where a woman died while he was performing an abortion, yet he'd evaded prosecution. He remained on the General Medical Register and was removed only after he failed to re-register in 1952, following his retirement to Port Spain, Trinidad. Spilsbury, always on the lookout for evidence of illegal abortions, described no evidence of interference with the pregnancy and noted that the dismemberment showed no particular anatomical skill. Although the first murder was unrelated to the second, it did lead to the discovery of the second trunk murder. The victim was Violet Kay, née Watts, also known as Sanders, who was aged 42. She'd been a dancer and a prostitute in London, where she met Tony Mancini, aged 26, who had a criminal record, including theft and loitering, but also worked as a waiter and bouncer. He was also known as Cecil Lewis England, which was his real name, Jack Notia, Tony English and Hyman Gold. They moved to Brighton together in September 1933 and lived at various addresses. Kay and Mancini's relationship was too tempestuous. One argument occurred on the 10th of May 1934 at the Skylark Cafe on the seafront where Mancini worked, when a drunk Kay accused him of being familiar with a teenage waitress called Elizabeth Atwell. Kay was never seen again, and the following day Mancini told friends she'd gone to Paris and gave some of her clothes and belongings to Atwell. Her sister-in-law, who also received a telegram which read, quote, "Going abroad, good job, sail Sunday, will write, vi," end quote. It was later established it had been sent from Brighton that morning, by which time Kay was already dead. Mancini then took new lodgings in 52 Kemp Street, close to the station, and transported a trunk to his new flat by handcart. He put the trunk, with Kay's non-dismembered body inside it at the foot of his bed, covered it with a cloth and used it as a coffee table, in despite of the smell and leaking fluids of which visitors complained. Cabe's absence had been noted by police and Mancini was questioned. Apparently panicked, he went on the run. During the investigation related to the unsolved trunk murder, police searched premises close to the station and stumbled upon Kay's remains in Mancini's lodgings. Mancini was arrested in south-east London. The post-mortem was also carried out by Sir Bernard Spilsbury. Mancini's trial opened in December 1934 in Lewes Assizes and lasted 5 days. The prosecution was led by J.C. Cassels, and on his team was Quinton Hogg, later Lord Hailsham. Norman Burkitt was defence counsel. The prosecution focused on Kay's death by a blow to the head. A graphologist confirmed the handwriting on the form for the telegram sent to Kay's sister matched that on menus Mancini had written at the Skylark Cafe. One witness, Doris Saville, said Mancini had asked her to provide a false alibi. Other witnesses, friends of Mancini, claimed he boasted in the days after the murder of giving his missus the biggest hiding of her life. Burkitt's defence focused on Kay's work as a prostitute and as a character. Mancini claimed he had discovered Kay's body at the flat at 44 Park Crescent, Brighton. Thinking the police would not believe his story because he had a criminal record, he kept the matter a secret and had put her body in a trunk. Burkitt speculated she had been murdered by a client and fell down steps into the flat. The quality and nature of the forensic evidence was also drawn into doubt by the defence, who queried the amount of morphine in Kay's blood and proved that items of clothing stained with blood had been purchased after Kay's death. The testimony of Sir Bernard Spilsbury, whose stellar career as a principal home pathologist was already in decline, was effectively demolished by a brilliant cross-examination and closing speech of Norman Burkitt. A number of witnesses also confirmed that Mancini and Kay had seemed a content couple. After 2.25 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict or not guilty verdict. In 1976, Mancini confessed to a News of the World journalist. He explained that during a blazing row with Kay, she was also attacked him with a hammer he'd used to break coal for their fire. He had wrestled the hammer from her, and when she had demanded it back, he had thrown it at her, hitting her on the left temple. A prosecution of Mancini's for perjury was considered, but rejected due to lack of corroboration. The press attention to the 1934 trunk murders revived interest in a previous Brighton trunk murder. In the 19th century, John Holloway murdered his wife Celia Holloway, a painter, on Chain Pier, then transported her body in a trunk on a wheelbarrow to Lovers Walk in Preston Park, Brighton, and buried the remains. Holloway was arrested and tried in Lewes and hanged at Horsham Gaol on the 16th of December 1931. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help.